How do other traditions of spiritual teachings relate to the metaphysics?
Um, Bear in mind that there is a slight difference in emphasis in terms of what's attempting to be accomplished. So, uh, in the sense of trying to develop a spiritual nature, like if someone is looking to develop a spiritual nature, then the advice that the Krishnamurti is giving is actually very good advice. It's essentially learn the nature of your own self, both your physical self, your inner nature of spirit, but to really ground that in a kind of whole experience sort of sense, right? Because part of the thing about spirituality is that it has to do with integration. So, in effect, one of the measures of spirituality is the degree to which we can experience all things that are possible to experience and still remain in integrity, still remain a whole self. Um, for example, like you look at sort of the revered historical, like in Christianity, for example, you had this guy who was nailed to a cross, and despite all that, he still held to his nature. He didn't become someone else. He might have complained in a sense, of they know not what they do, but on the other hand, he is described as still remaining in integrity with his own nature. And for example, with the Buddha, you have a person that's become enlightened who has said had this bliss experience, who's experienced samadhi, and yet despite the titanic quality of joy that is being experienced, that he still again remained whole and integral with respect to being a whole self. And so, in effect, it's like, despite the um, sheer range of experience going from like the absolute depths of pain to the absolute ecstasis of joy, that um, total integrity is held. And so, from that sense, I think that there's real value in this. Like if you're wanting to be able to access states that are more mystical or more levels of elevated knowledge, you need to do it through the integrity of one's own sensory capacities, one total organism of self. So in that sense, I think that for the purposes of becoming enlightened, that having a good, strong spiritual nature is essential. And of course, to do that, you need to essentially be really deeply in touch with all of the feeling and capacities of self. Now, the metaphysics, on the other hand, is while basically supporting all of this, is not just talking about spirituality. It's talking about religion and science and technology, as well as magic and mysticism. So, in that sense, the range of applications of this body of work is actually somewhat broader, rather than thinking about it as being something that is um, particularly for personal development or maybe potentially community development, which is a bit what religion would be in its idealized sense. That we're actually embracing also a knowledge of causation, which would include things like science and technology, and a deep knowledge of the nature of change and the nature of choice. And so in this sense, um, there's a degree to which I think of the metaphysics as being inclusive of many of these spiritual traditions, because they are actually speaking to similar things in the sense of talking about how to integrate the individual in the community, or the individual experiences into life, to develop some capacities to move with flow, with nature. Particularly Eastern religions are very much about learning to live with change, learning to live with the dynamic of the world. So in this sense, you can think of the East as having become quite adept at working with change, and the West as having become quite adept at working with causation, and the metaphysics rounding this out in terms of how to work with choice, how to think about how we make choices individually and collectively, and seeing as how the emphasis in sense of the need, like the current epoch of time, is very much defined in terms of needing to be much more skillful in the spaces of things like existential risk and civilization design, that developing much better capacities to make holistic choice at the level of the group, at the level of the planet or of the species, is therefore much more paramount in the the field of application. So, in a sense, what is the things that get more time in the teaching of the metaphysics essentially is now going to have an emphasis much more relevant to the place where humanity is at right now. So in that sense, it would seem that there's a disconnect between how I'm holding the teaching of this versus how other leaders, religious and spiritual in the past would have held that. But I think that in a lot of senses, there's a great deal of overlap in the underlying topology of how these things work together.